if you're anything like I used to be, potential client calls are really stressful and you don't really know what to say or what to ask or how you can kind of move the conversation along when you feel like it gets stuck. And I used to handle potential client calls with a ton of stress. Like I used to have to turn the AC on like all the way down just so I wouldn't sweat and be all gross on video if we did video calls or like, I don't know. It just made me feel better to have the AC on. But when I did my potential client calls, I just got in this place of fear and being worried that they were going to negotiate or worried that they thought I wasn't qualified or that I just wasn't the right writer for them and that made me wrong or like I should be qualified for everybody. But it's just not true. So today we're going to talk about how to handle potential client calls and how to be yourself and be a normal person and act like your clients are also normal people. I think something that is really important to remember as we kind of start off here is that your clients are just other people. You're having a conversation with another person. That's it. It's not like they hold like this magic key to your future. It's not that if this call doesn't go well, like you won't get the contract or won't get to work with them. It's nothing like that. It's just a call with another person, and you should act like you're talking to a normal person. Like don't try to treat it as like I need this client and I have to do this thing and be professional and like be very suit and tie. Like you know what? It's just not really like that. Being more of yourself attracts more people to you who are more like you. That means you end up getting clients that are a better fit for you. They like your writing better. You guys are a match on tone and style. You guys are a match in work styles. Like they're not emailing you when you're off hours or, trying to text you for certain things. So when you're walking through your client calls, start off with the concept that like this is just a call with another person. That person just happens to work at this company and maybe you might work together. Just start there. If you're really nervous and scared about it, like just make it very simple. Make it very simple. It's just another person. I used to be really, oh, hello. Well, if you guys heard that grumble, I used to be really nervous because I thought that everybody would think I was dumb. And I used to be really nervous because I didn't really know the questions to ask. Like now I have an entire document full of questions, that I ask on all my potential client calls. I make sure that I go through them. And if they didn't answer them, then I ask those questions. But when you get on a call with someone, try to take the pressure off of like sealing the deal and making it the sale and all that stuff. Like this is a conversation of getting to know each other. It's not so much about always walking away with the contract or always walking away with sending a proposal or talking about the next, like, hey, we're going to work together. This is what's happening. Of course, you kind of want to end the call with something that's like, what are our next steps? Like, what do you think? Like, hopefully you would kind of get the chance to send them a proposal. But I think a lot of times writers get really nervous because they think that the call is supposed to be like a sales call. I think it's supposed to be this thing where you hop on and you end up convincing someone to buy the thing you have, right? Like content, like they want white papers or case studies or they want some content marketing package. Like the whole point of the call, people like set it up to be the situation where they're hoping that you buy the thing or that you get, an upfront payment or something. And I think that's kind of putting too many expectations up front. You're getting on this call as a getting to know you. Like this is how a lot of writers end up with clients that aren't a fit for them. They stay with them too long and they're like, why is my writing career not growing? And it's like, because you're being a different person. You're getting on a call. You're being a totally different person than you are as a writer and as someone who runs their business. You're trying to win the deal. You're also going in with this like salesy mindset of like, I need them to sign. And I found a lot of times they're like, well, what do I do to like convince them? Like nothing. You don't. You don't have to convince them. If you are a fit and if you mesh together and you guys are on the same wavelength when it comes to like their project, budget, and what you want to work on, it all just works out. It works together. Those factors come into play. It's not about convincing someone to buy something. So if, for example, I've been on calls, like, I don't know, thousands of client calls over the years, yeah, it's definitely been on thousands of client calls. So anyways, I've been on these calls where people try to treat me like an employee, like try to give me a job interview where they're like, well, how will you do this for company or blah, blah, blah. It's like, come on now, get it together. Like, this isn't a job interview. We're trying to see if we're a fit. Is what you want matched with the thing I want? Does that work for both of us? We're not trying to be like, if you buy now, I'll give you this discount, or if you sign on for this content package, like I'll give you this thing, or trying to convince them of all these stats of, oh, well, white papers work because da 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 da, or like, calm down. It's going to be okay. We don't have to get all worked up and try to convince them of every little thing. Like, the more, when I was early on as a freelancer, like, um, when I kind of was learning how to speak with clients, or like even just getting on these calls and just trying to get my shit together, they were this weird mix of like me trying to convince them that this was a good idea, and then like it being this weird thing where I'd get nervous if it didn't work out, or if they were like, hey, like send us a proposal, or like our budget is this, and that didn't match what my rates were at the time. It was just this weird, confusing thing. And I think the best way to put that is like, you have to be yourself. You can't be somebody else. You can't get on this call and try to like magically convince someone to do something. Like, usually a lot of times when you get on calls, your clients have projects. They already have projects that they're thinking about. And if you're getting on a call where your client hasn't told you, hey, we have this or your potential client has a project, like, hey, we're thinking about this, like, don't get on that call. I've set this up in my business that like I don't get on calls with people who just say like, let's kind of like wander around. Like, they have projects. They say that in the email, like, hey, I want to talk about collaborating together. We have some projects in mind. Excuse me. Hey, let's talk about these content marketing things. We need 3 case studies, 4 blog posts, and this thing. Like, they have an outlined project already. Now, I know that the expectation here is kind of like, yeah, you've been freelancing for like a decade. Like, it's different. Well, if you're first starting out, or if you're not, you haven't been freelancing as long, you can still only hop on calls with people who have defined work. Ask them before you get on the call. Say like, hey, can you tell me a little bit more about your project? That's my favorite, one of my favorite questions. Someone emails you, and you just reply and say like, hey, thanks so much for reaching out. Can you tell me a little bit more about the project? And then, let me know if you had a budget in mind. That clears up a lot before you get on the call, and it lowers the stress of the call. You already know, like, if they come back and they're like, yeah, we have $2,000 for a case study, and that's like it, it's cut and dry. That's a lot easier to go into a call to say like, hey, now that we know what we're talking about a case study, and now we know how much is your budget, like, and tell me about the case study. Is it a small case study where $2,000 is totally reasonable, or is it like this multi-stage case study, or some sort of giant white paper, or I don't know, a content marketing thing where it's like multiple stages where their budget is not relevant to the things they want, or not relevant, is not matched to the things they want to accomplish. Like, they want a lot more accomplished for less money. You know this beforehand. You don't have to get on the call. You say like, hey, I don't think I'm the right fit for this. And everybody moves on. You say like, I wish you the best in finding the right writer, because you do. You want them to find someone who is actually a fit for them. You don't want to waste their time, and you don't want to waste your time getting on a call with someone who is not a fit. Just start from the very beginning and ask them the basic question. Can you tell me about your project, if they haven't told you in the initial email? And then ask them a little bit about what their budget is. These are kind of things we do before we get on the call, so the call is like less stressful, so the call is more directional, so the call has strategy and like flow to it, so it's not this weird thing where they're like, hey, let's get on a call and just talk. Like, no. No, don't get on a call with someone and just talk. You probably will. I've done it hundreds of times where I get on a call with someone and I just end up talking, and it like we end up in this situation where we're just talking. Like, it's not, they're like, yeah, we're thinking about maybe this or maybe that. And they don't have a lot of structure, and they're not very defined in their project scope. So it's going to happen, but we want to minimize that. We want to get on calls where people, like, we can up basically, our chances of getting a good client for us. We've already screened them at the email level. We're going to screen them on the call. We're going to screen them at the proposal process, and then we'll screen them during our initial project. There's a lot of different processes here that we can use to work really well with our clients, but that call is a really good chance to the email is a really good chance to screen for the call. That way you get on the call and everybody's time is being well spent. You already know that they have a project, they have a certain budget that works for you. You're kind of ironing out some details and getting a feel. So that's kind of a little overview piece. But the next thing I wanted to talk about is Um, well, there's two more things. So we're going to talk about personality and the green light, red light thing that I use with a coaching student. And then we're going to talk about basically how to feel somebody out. So when you're on a call, one of the things I often say is like, this call is to feel out whether you guys work well together. Can you make jokes? If they curse, are you offended or are you laughing? If they say something where you're like, ooh, like that's definitely not right, or you're like, oh yeah, that's totally awesome. Like, these calls are way better than email to actually ping someone in real time to see like, hey, are we on the same wavelength? Like, do we get each other? Are we laughing? Like, are we having a good time? Like, or is this really terrible and boring and like just like, ugh, like it's very easy to get on a call with someone and feel them out. You know when they hesitate for a really long time. You know when they're trying to explain something to you and you're like, ooh, like, I don't know about that. Like, it's very easy to tell when you're on the call with someone versus email when someone has, I don't know, hours or days to respond, right? On a call, someone has to respond immediately. They have to, otherwise we're just going to sit here in silence for a minute, minutes on end, which would be weird. So for me, I use that a lot of times to just like be myself. So this is, we're going to go into like the green light, red light thing that I think is a very good example. So you have to get on these calls and you have to be yourself, which I just kind of use as a green light. So your green light is basically that's your personality. That's like your go. You're like, yep, this is a green light. I'm going. I've got this together. This is like how I work. This is these are my samples, or like this is like if they ask you, certain questions about your work history or your freelance experience, you tell them about that. And then there's the red lights. So that's means like obviously stop, like do not do not pass go, do not collect upfront payment, like none of that stuff. So when I explain this to one of my coaching students, I think it makes a lot of sense. You don't want to be a red light going to meet other red lights and then your work is a green light and then you're matching with a red light. That's a big mistake. The red light is when you go into a client call and pretend to be somebody you're not. You pretend to be this like, I'm so professional and stodgy and like I am a business person. Like you get in this personality, or you get overindulgent and you're like, oh yeah, I can do that. Like I've got everything I like. You have to be yourself. It's okay to say you don't know something. I can tell you, you can say something like, hey, I don't know right offhand, but I'm happy to look it up. You can say something like, hey, like I'm really great at research. I'm happy to go look that up later on. Like if you're great at research, please don't lie. um, but you have to be yourself. If you are acting like a red light, you're going to attract red light clients, which means that you're going to attract clients who are not a fit for you. They're not going to work out. You're going to be like, why isn't this working? And why do my clients do this? And they will all have similar habits and they'll all have similar personality traits, and it will be a problem. You have to be a green light. You have to be yourself. You have to like show up on a call like you would your work. You don't want to show up on your on a call as one thing and then you submit your work, like you submit the content to them and it's like a totally different world to them. You need to be a green light to attract other green lights. You need to be, and we're not talking about like, we're talking about attracting as a fit thing. When you get on your call and you're a green light, you're acting like yourself, you can make jokes, be a human being and treat the other person like a human being, you will get clients who are green lights. The red lights will stick out to you very, very easily. You'll be like, oh shit, this is a red light. Like, no, I gotta get out of here. It will be very apparent that they are not your green light. And then you can be like, you know what? I totally appreciate your time, but the more we talk, I just don't feel like we're quite a right fit. But I wish you the best in finding the right writer for your project, or whatever you want to say to get out of the call. But you can't play this game of being a different person. I've seen writers do that where they like get a client and then they're like, oh, my client hates my work, I don't get it. Well, you were a red light. You were a red light. You attracted a red light. And then when you went back to green light mode, when you were being yourself and writing and doing all this stuff that they asked you to do, and by, by doing that, now there's not a fit anymore. And now it's very difficult to like submit your work. You're going to have to do a lot of edits. They might want you to rewrite the whole thing because you missed tone and style. Even if you asked up front about that you might have to give a refund. You might have to, cancel the contract. You might have to deal with a lot of headaches. There's a lot of things where it's just like, it's a big mistake to try to be this version of yourself that you're not on these calls. And I'm not saying like let it all hang out, show up on, with like Cheeto dust all over the place. Like, don't do that. Don't do that. Be professional, but be a human being and try to be try to make jokes. If you're a person that makes jokes, do that. As like a good example, there's, the writer Jennifer Goforth Gregory. She's mentioned this in her blog, I think. And she talks about how she's like, yeah, if I have a client call where someone says a well-timed curse word, I know that we're like a really good fit. What's that for you? What are the pieces that pop out during a client call where you're like, oh, this is totally like, this is my jam. I'm on board. Like, yes. What are those? Sometimes, like, if you're more, buttoned up, maybe that's someone, like, if someone curses or if they do, so I don't know, they talk about their project a certain way, or they treat you like an employee, or like there's some kind of weird things that happen, you know, it's 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 about knowing that you have these certain things where you're like little pings that along the way that work and things that don't. So if you get those things that don't work, you can leave the call and be like, I'm out, ejection seat, I'm done. But you know, the piece that's important is like you have to be a green light attracting green lights. You don't want to be a red light, attract red lights, and then become a green light and it'll blow up in your face. Like, it's blown up in my face so many times, I can't even tell you. So when you're getting on these calls, we're wrapping that up. Be yourself. Be a nice person. Be a nice human. Be yourself. Don't get the Cheeto dust everywhere. Try to look clean, like, put together. That's as far as we're gonna go with that. Anyways, now we're gonna talk about the next thing I have is let's talk about money. So I used to find this really, really stressful. Oh, you know what? We haven't done a pup date. I just realized Charlotte's over here being a derp. So let's do a quick pup date before I switch things. So Bear is over there sleeping and being an adorable geriatric angel. Here you go, buddy. Good job. Charlotte's over here wagging. Charlotte, you have to go back to your little home. Come on. You have to go back to your hobbit home. Go back to your hobbit home. Back up. Back up. You have to back up all the way. You have to back up. That's good enough. Good job. You did it. All right, you get one more. Good job. Good job. All right. Cool. So now we have our pup date. If you feel like you have gotten value out of this so far, if you feel like this has been helpful, if you feel like this needs to be shared, feel free to share it, or feel free to give it a thumbs up or subscribe below. Okay, we'll give you one more because you look super cute and I like your funny ears. Here you go. Good job, guys. Bear, you look great. So, all right, let's go talk about money. I had a huge problem talking about money for the longest time. I felt really uncomfortable with it. I felt like it was a weird conversation to have, and it stressed me out. It was one of the reasons I had to turn the AC down. So when I was talking about money, all I'm asking is like, what's your budget? It's in my free pricing guide. It's like the number one question that we talk about all the time. Free pricing guide's linked below. What's your budget? Very clear, very cut. Like, we're just asking, like, hey, do you have a budget in mind? Hey, do you have an idea of what you want to spend? And you'll get on calls with people and they'll be like, no, we have no idea. And the answer to that is like, whether you have $200,000 or $5,000 to spend on this. So like if you roll into this and you say like, hey, what's your budget? And they're like, we have no idea. You can follow up. I think this was Lindy Alexander mentioned this a little while back, and I'm glad she wrote about it because you should ask this. Is like, hey, like, are you thinking like 1,000 to 5,000? Or are you thinking like, 2 to 3,000 or 10 to 20,000, depending on what kind of project you're talking about. But give them ballpark ranges. Give them somewhere to play so that you can see if you're in the same pool here. If you try to like play this game where like, well, can you guess what your budget is like? Just give them a general idea, because you will get on calls and they'll be like, oh, we thought that blog post would be like $100. And you're like, no, that's $1,000. That is a really in-depth blog post. Or you're getting on a call and they're like, we want this and 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 this, and we want to pay you $10 to do it. And you're like, oh no. Or sometimes what happens is you get on a call and someone's like, we want this and this and this. Our budget is this. Does that work for you? And you're like, oh, perfect. That's exactly what I would charge for that project. Like, we're not in the business of gouging people and being like, oh, thank God they have more money. We're going to magically like charge more money now. Like, no, we want to be a match. We want to match. They say it's 3K and you're like, let me look at the details. After you look at the details, you're like, yeah, that's totally a fair and reasonable rate. That's what I would charge. We're a fit. Boop. You know, it's money isn't about asking them to get more money. Like, we are not asking what their budget is to see if we can expand our project to fill their budget. No. We are asking what their budget is because we want to see if we're a fit. And to me, that kind of helped take the stress out of the money situation. Is like, we're not talking about like their personal financials, and we're not asking them to divulge their family history about finances. We're just asking, are we playing in the same pool? Are you playing football and I'm playing racquetball, or like are we both playing baseball? Like, what's happening here? We just want to make sure we're playing the same sport. We want to be in the same pool. We're like in the same area. And the money part is, it's not greedy or wrong or um, distasteful to ask what their budget is. The problem is that if you don't ask that up front on a call, or like I said in the initial email, like sometimes they don't answer it in the initial email and you have to ask again on the call. But when you ask on the call, the point is just like, are we a fit? It's right back to green light, green light. We want to be green light, green light. It's not like trying to shame them for not having enough to pay your rates, or like it's not trying to gouge them. We are just trying to say that we're in the same pool. So asking them about money is just strictly about fit. That kind of alleviates a lot of the stress. So we are trying to make sure that when we talk about this project and we hear about it and we hear about their budget, that they see value in the content too. If you talk to someone and they're giving you a rate that you believe is well below what that content really is, or like how much work or time or effort or sweat or blood, sweat, and tears you have to put into it, then they don't really see as much value in that content. You want to find those people, like I said, the green light, where they see the value in the content, and to get that valuable content, it costs this much. Can you do that for this much? Does this make sense to you? Now we're both playing in the same pool. So when you're asking about budget and money, try not to think of it as, try to think of it more as um, this quick ballpark thing. We're just seeing if we're in the same ballpark. That's it. We're not trying to like get all in the nitty gritty right now. The nitty gritty comes into our proposal, which would be our next steps. So let's roll into that. So let's say you get on the call, you ask all the questions, they tell you all the stuff they want to tell you, you get all the information you need. The best way to kind of end your call, if they haven't already said it, like they're like, hey, like, what do you think? And you talk about that. If you're kind of in this lull at the end, you can ask them like, hey, like, what would be the next steps? Like, I'm happy to send over a proposal for you to consider. I'm happy to, blah, 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 whatever. But you want to ask about next steps. You want to ask about, like, they say, oh, I have to go, check with Dan, and Dan says this, like, let me go check with Dan. And you're like, okay, cool. Like, I'll follow up in a week because he has, this person has to go check with Dan. So I know that that's going to take a while, whatever. So next steps gives you a timeline of how that call is panning out and how that potential client could be panning out. If they get on the call and you're like, ooh, red light, we got to get out of here. That's one thing. You get on the call and you're like, green light, and they're like, I got to check with Dan. You're like, okay, that's about a week. We'll follow up later. Next steps, I say like, yeah, I'd love to get a proposal. You're like, sweet. So you go back and create your little proposal. I like Dubsado, 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 yeah. And then you send that over and you kind of work through that with them there. But the next steps piece is really important. The next steps piece is all about like, where do we go from here? Like, we just spent 15, 20, 30 minutes on the phone call, like describing all these things and trying to figure out whether or not this is actually going to work. What are we walking away with here? Are we walking away with a potential project? Are we walking away with like, we're checking with Dan, or like, hey, this is coming up in 3 months, like follow up with this in a little bit until we kind of sort our shit out? Like, what's going on here? And those next steps kind of like help you plan your business. They're helping you plan for like, your timelines. Like, how is your calendar going to look? Like, if this pans out and they said, yeah, we need it by May 1st, you're like, okay, I got to build that in. And so it's calendar based, it's workload based, it's vacation based. Like, do you have time off coming up that you're like, oh, I can't do this then, I need to plan that out. It's financial based, right? If they're giving you an upfront payment, now you know, like, hey, I'm sending this proposal. Maybe I'll have this in the tank in a little bit. We'll have to see, but it helps you say, like, okay, I sent this proposal. It's for this amount. I would like to make this per month. Now I have to kind of, move my chess pieces around and see, like, what other kind of projects I need to pull, or like, how is everything looking financially? There's a lot of different pieces in there that really come away with this next steps question. Like, if they say follow up in 3 months, you're like, okay, so this is basically a warm lead that I'll follow up with in 3 months, but I need to, like, market, get more clients. Or, maybe you didn't need that client. Maybe you're like just taking the call because you're like, hey, I'm planning ahead. I'm booked this quarter. I just want to make sure that I have enough for, later on. It gives you a lot of information. So always ask about, basically, like, what are your next steps? Like, what do you do next? Do you submit the proposal? Do you wait for Dan? Do you, do you wait for them to get back to you? Like, don't wait for them to get back to you. Let's just start there. Boomerang it. Every time you get something where they're like, we're going to go do this thing and check back later, boomerang that message and follow up with them later. Yeah, always boomerang. So if there's any questions, you can pop them in the chat. I'm happy to answer them. And I've got, like, one more thing that I wanted to mention here, and I'll give you guys a quick update while I think about it. So, Bear, what happened? You got stuck under the pet bed. There you go, buddy. Good job. You look old and crunchy. All right. Why do you want to lay over here? Come on. Can you come over here and participate just for a little bit? Can you participate over here, though? Good job. Good girl. Good girl. I think you just move around because you think you're going to get more Treatos somewhere else. You're sneaky. You're a sneaky bean. You're a sneaky bean. Here you go, buddy. All right. How you guys doing today? You doing great? They're like, yes, we are. We're perfect. You are. All right. Okay. So last thing, we only have a few more minutes left. So last thing, if you ever get nervous on a client call, if you ever have something where you basically don't know what to say, or you're really nervous and you're sweating a lot and your, like, voice is shaking or something like that, just take a deep breath. A lot of times when I used to get on these calls, I would just, like, hold my breath and I'd be like, oh my God, like, just take a deep breath. That's it. Take a deep breath. It's going to be okay. It's just another human. That's all it is. It's just another human. They don't hold the keys to your future in their hand. You know what? That's just kind of how it is. It's just another human. That's it. If you're nervous and you're scared and you're like, I don't know what to do, and, like, I'm freaking out, and just take a deep breath. If you're really, really worried, you can do what I did. It's like, write everything down on a Google Doc or a Word doc before you get on the call, so you know exactly where you're going. Ask these questions, follow up about next steps, then do this, then do this. Like, write yourself a step-by-step guide about how to do your client calls so you don't have to worry about, like, getting stuck in the moment. But if you get stuck, it's normal. You can just ask them another question. Like, you can ask, like, if you're worried about something or you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do, you can ask them to clarify something from before. You can ask them to, I don't know, you can go through your list of questions. There's a lot of ways that you can kind of relax, and, like, if you get stuck, just, like, let them talk for a little bit, and then you can kind of be like, oh, okay, I remember what I was doing. Like, let's go do that. But sometimes you learn a lot of stuff from doing that too. Like, every time I got nervous and I would ask them, like, oh, well, can you explain that a little bit more? Or, oh, well, like, are you thinking about, these things? Like, maybe you can ask them, like, let's say they're asking for a case study and you say, like, well, how many people do you want to interview for that? Or you ask, some follow-up questions about the type of content. That gives you more detail to price the project and create a proposal, but it's also kind of like giving you that little bit of space to kind of, like, calm down a little bit while they explain. So if you ever get stuck or you ever get nervous, deep breath. Remember, green light, green light. Be yourself. It's just another human. We want to make sure that we are connecting and getting a fit with the right clients so we don't end up in a situation and our clients don't end up in a situation where they get content that's totally different than what they think they're getting. We want to make sure that we match our clients and that we're not coming up to this call where we pretend to try to sell them on the idea of this content. Like, that's not the point. We want to be with people who are like, we know we need this content. Here's why we know we need it. Here's what it'll do to help our audience. And here's basically the details of like what types of content and when we need them. That's what you want to hear. There's a lot of things that go on in client calls where you'll end up, getting answers to things you didn't even know, like questions you didn't ask that they will answer on their own. And you're like, oh, okay. And that'll help a lot. So if you feel like this has been helpful, if you feel like you want to learn a little bit more about freelance writing, feel free to subscribe below, give it a little thumbs up. One more thing. The last thing I'm going to do is I am holding a masterclass. I'm holding 2 masterclasses next week on Tuesday and Wednesday. They are linked below. So if you are interested at all in joining the masterclass, it's about how to build a profitable, sustainable freelance writing business. And yeah, you can check them out through the links below. And I hope to see you there. If you have any questions about them, you can pop them in the comments and I will answer them. But yeah, I hope this was helpful. I'll give one last pup date just because they're like looking cute. You're just so funny. I can't believe you sit like a little Frenchie. You're such a French bean. Here you go, buddy. You look adorable. Charlotte, you're just the funniest little dog. And Bo's like, I just want more Treatos. All right, so I hope that was helpful. Masterclass details below for next week on Tuesday and Wednesday of next week. So it'll be Tuesday, April 13th and Wednesday, April 14th.